It's great to be here. And I think it's a great topic. And I may approach it from somewhat more of a Buddhist angle, maybe more than secular, but maybe I can work things so that I touch on all different perspectives. So mm, maybe a small introduction about of of who I am. So I am in Portland, Oregon right now. I am an hour behind you. It's very hot in Oregon. There's a little bit of a heat wave. I'm assuming it's hot where a lot of you are. If any of you are actually connected to New Mexico, I'm assuming it's pretty hot there. Um, and in Portland as well. Greg's in Portland. Oh, great.
Warm.
um, it's very warm. I've got my fan on, so if you hear a sort of faint buzzing, that might be what it is. I also have the sun comes through my front window at 6 in the evening, 7 in the evening. That's why I've got this kind of spotlight. So who I am. So I have been a student of FPMT, I would say, for 15 or so years. I went to Maitripa College in Portland, Oregon, and did their program when it first started. So that was about a 4-year program at the time. And then I worked for international office in Portland, Oregon. So that's like the administrative offices in Portland, Oregon for FPMT. And I worked for their magazine for 10 or so years. Then I worked for their education department for a little bit as a copy editor. Um, and the benefit of having gone through Maitripa and then also having worked at IOF for so long, and particularly doing copy editing, is I've been able to read a lot. And that doesn't make me an expert per se, but I've been exposed to a lot of things, and so I feel very grateful for that. So it's on the basis of that reading and having been in this lineage's community for a while that I speak. At Maitripa, I lead classes, sometimes introductory Buddhist philosophy classes, introductory meditation classes. And this year at Maitripa College, I'm going to lead my first sort of official class at the school, and that'll be more of a communications class because I have a degree in counseling, marriage, couple, family counseling as well. And so I bring a lot of that in to my talks as well. So I would want to give sort of rough outline of how I'm going to approach things, and then we'll just sail. We'll just set forth and sail. So I think I wanted to give a little bit of an introduction to the Buddhist worldview as I understand it, connecting it back to motivation, and then I wanted to give some examples, maybe from what I've read, but also from my personal life, if I can. And then I would like to do a meditation practice related to motivation. And if we do all those three things, then we should probably fill up the time as well. And maybe I should leave some time for questions and answers if necessary at the end. So maybe I'll shorten some aspect of what I just said and then see if there's any questions. I may not be able to answer things 100% thoroughly, but at least we can brainstorm together some ideas, and perhaps we'll collectively know some resources to go to, or or just have some discussion or something. So it should be pretty casual. So in the Buddhist worldview, it's important to distinguish the difference between an ordinary person and an extraordinary person, or an ordinary person and the word you'll probably most see in FPMT is someone like a holy person. An ordinary person is someone who, by definition, is subject to delusions and karma. But the context in which that occurs is that a person has a body and a mind. So we say a person has a body and a mind, and an ordinary person is an entity that has a body and a mind, but is subject to delusions and karma. A holy person could have a body and a mind, but they're not subject to delusions and karma. Delusions, when I say delusions, sometimes it's translated as delusion, sometimes it's translated as afflictive emotion, sometimes it's translated as disturbing emotion. And what I'm talking about are those types of mind that have certain qualities, and then some of the specifics will help distinguish between them. So disturbing emotions by their nature are disturbing. They disturb our inner peace. And they're afflictive because they're based in ignorance, or they're not based on reality or an appropriate view of reality. And they're destructive in that they cause us to generate negative karmas, and those karmas can ripen given the right conditions. And by nature, or by definition, they'll ripen as some kind of suffering. So when we're talking about delusions, it's often grouped into three: anger or hatred, attachment or clinging, and ignorance. And if you've ever seen the painting of the Wheel of Samsara, then you'll see three animals in the center: a pig, a snake, and a rooster. And they'll represent those kind of disturbing, the core, the core states of mind that perpetuate suffering. So an ordinary person is subject to those states of mind. They engage in volitional action, so in karmas with their body, speech, and mind. And then those karmas accumulate on the mind. And then given the right conditions, they can ripen. So that would be an ordinary being. And then a holy being would have weakened those disturbing emotions very strongly, or perhaps eradicated them at some point if we're talking about a Buddha. And because they've eradicated those disturbing, those afflictions, then they don't accumulate karma. That karma can't ripen, and so they don't have suffering based off of karma. So a Buddha, so the word Buddha comes from the root for to awaken. And so awaken from what? So awaken from those disturbing states of mind. And then how do we do that? So when we're talking of a Buddha, we talk of a being that's developed all the positive qualities of the mind and eradicated all the imperfections of mind, or eradicated all the imperfections of mind. So then what does that mean? um, in one way, a Buddha's eradicated those disturbing emotions, and so those are sometimes called afflictive obscurations, but they've also eradicated um, what are called cognitive obscurations, which is the limitations of knowledge set in a maybe easier to digest and less technical ways. Buddha has developed compassion and love for living beings limitlessly. They've developed their patience, they've developed their perseverance, their focus, their ethical training, their generosity, their wisdom. Limitlessly, and they've abandoned their neuroses, their selfishness, their impatience. Oh, I'm sweating. It's so hot. Their anger, their clinging attachment to people. And because they've done that, then they work tirelessly and spontaneous for living beings. So then a question arises is, why do they do that? And then we have a set of meditations to think about why someone would want to become that way or do that. Mm. Mm. Uh, I'm sort of jumping around a little bit. the the where to start? So then imagine that you want to practice a spiritual path or practice Buddhism. Then the question always becomes why. And in fact, a lot of what makes us humans is to wonder why we do anything at all. Why do we get up in the morning, or why do we get dressed or brush our teeth or go to work, or these kinds of things? It's a real central question. It's a real central question to Buddhism, because the ordinary answers that people have are seen as fundamentally problematic. So uh, in one collection of teachings, or in one sort of conceptualization of teachings, I think it comes from mind training tradition. They talk about the 8 mundane concerns. And so these are said to be what occurs in the mind of an ordinary person as they engage in the world. This so what kind of things are they talking about? So in the 8 mundane concerns, they talk about pursuing wealth, can be a reason why someone gets up in the morning and brushes their teeth. Or the fear of being poor could be the reason someone gets up and brushes their teeth. There can be pleasure and pain. So the reason I brush my teeth is because I don't want to experience pain of a toothache or something. Or the pleasure of being um, of 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 um, of my body being healthy. Well, for example, if someone gets up and goes to the gym to exercise, the pleasure of feeling strong and the fear of feeling weak. And they could do it for fame. So I get up and brush my teeth because I want to be beautiful and famous and appear on TV or YouTube or wherever this video will show up. Or notoriety. So the fear of notoriety. I brush my teeth because I don't want to become famous for having smelly breath or something like that. And I could get up and be praised. So isn't he so great? He's my best dental client. So I brush my teeth to get the praise of my dentist. Or the fear of blame, of being scolded by my dentist. From the Buddhist perspective, those are all motivations. They're called concerns, worldly concerns. But from one perspective, they're kinds of worldly motivations. And from the Buddhist perspective, those motivations by their nature lead to suffering. And in some ways, I think that seems a little obvious. But what's interesting is that motivation is the catalyst, the impetus for behavior. And in the Buddhist worldview, that motivation makes an impact on your mind and somehow changes the quality of that behavior. But interestingly, what if you had, from a Buddhist worldview, what if you had a spiritual motivation? Could you engage in those same actions? And I think that's a very interesting part of the Buddhist worldview. They would say, more or less, they would say you can engage in the same actions with different motivations and they will have different results to them. So what do I mean by spiritual motivations? When Buddhism was moving across Asia from India into Southeast Asia, East Asia, Himalayan region, when it was going into Tibet, there were periods where it flourished and then periods where it was threatened. And in one period, the king of Tibet, or the certain kind of rulers of Tibet, it was seen that the Buddhism and the Dharma in Tibet had declined because of history, and so that they needed to get a pandit to come in back to Tibet in order to recalibrate everything. And the king, Yeshe, learned that Lama Yeshe was in India studying and that he was a famous pandit and that he should be invited to Tibet in order to revive the Dharma there. And Yeshe had a nephew, Changchep, and they attempted to get Lama Yeshe to come to India with gold and offerings and requests, and he wouldn't come because he was needed in India in the monastery and monastic university, and they wanted to hold on to him because they needed him for India. And so back and forth, and it didn't work out. And then eventually, there is uh, a an opposing leader who jails Yeshe and sort of holds him ransom and says that the only way to release, the only way that this this jailer is going to release Yeshe is to have Changchup, the nephew, bring that jailer Yeshe's weight in gold, and then he would release them. Or they would have to renounce Dharma and Buddhism, and then he would let them go. So their choices were to find gold that weighed as much as Yeshe, or to surrender their pursuit of spreading Dharma or reviving Dharma in Tibet. And Yeshe, Changchup accumulates gold, but can't accumulates enough gold, but it doesn't equal the weight of Yeshe. It equals the weight of Yeshe less the weight of his head. And so it's most of the gold, but it's not all of the gold, and so he won't be released. And the nephew and Yeshe, so Changchupa and Yeshe, they discuss what they should do. And Yeshe says, we can't accumulate any more gold. Do not give it to this jailer, this person's holding me for ransom. Take it to Lama Yeshe and beg and request that he comes. And Changchupa says that means that you'll have to stay you'll stay imprisoned. And Yeshe says, okay, this is more important for Tibet. This is important for the Dharma in general. So go ahead. And then Changchupa goes to India, takes the gold, leaves Yeshe, and then there's more story. And eventually Lama Yeshe does get convinced to come. Lama Yeshe, the way the traditional stories go, Lama Yeshe is said to have communication with Tara, a female Buddha, directly, and who tells him that he'll lose 20 years of his life if he leaves India and goes to Tibet, but that it would be important for Tibet and for the Dharma. And so Lama Yeshe agrees and leaves, and eventually gets to Tibet. And when he's there, he writes a poem prayer called "Lamp to the Path of Enlightenment," "Lamp on the Path of Enlightenment." And in that poem, he articulates this idea of scopes of beings. And he says, it's a very short poem, but it's expanded in different commentaries. So a worldly being is someone who lives their life for the pleasures and to avoid the pains of this life. So they're not even considered a spiritual being at all. And then a being of small scope is a being who's considered a spiritual person, and they are focused on the quality of their next life, keeping in mind that this is a tradition that believes in reincarnation. And then the scope of the medium practitioner is a practitioner that's dedicated to transcending the cycle of samsara. This is the cycle of accumulating karmas, being thrown by the force of those karmas into a new life, experiencing the sufferings of that life, accumulating more karma while you're there, being thrown into another life, experiencing the suffering there endlessly. So a medium scope practitioner is someone who wants to transcend that process, wants to abandon that process. And so that sometimes that's called liberation or nirvana or moksha sometimes. And then the great scope practitioner is the being who wants to complete that, to transcend that process, who also wants to transcend that process, but more than that, they want to help others transcend that process of samsara. And so that being, the being that wants to help others transcend that process while also transcending samsara themselves. So that being is a great scope practitioner, and they're the kind of being that will become a bodhisattva. And then, but what does that mean to be a bodhisattva? So there are lots of definitions. A bodhisattva is a being who possesses a mind of bodhicitta. The mind of bodhicitta is the mind that is focused, dedicated, is willing to work towards developing, to becoming a Buddha for the benefit of others. So said in a different way, a being who's dedicated to abandoning all their limitations, all their afflictions, all their disturbing mental states, and to develop all their positive states, all their generosity, ethics, patience, perseverance, concentration, wisdom, and so forth, in order to benefit beings. So in a way, a bodhisattva is someone who wants to acquire all the tools to continually work for others in the best way. To acquire the tools is to say that you're a Buddha. To work for others the best way is exactly that. In very plain language, it's just to benefit others in the best way, to help them off the cycle, to help them become Buddhas themselves, but all the other varieties of benefits that occur along the way. So giving someone a glass of water who's thirsty, because I'm so hot and that's all I can think about, is also Buddha's work. But the motivation behind it can be different. And so we have these scopes, right? So you can have, so from Lama Yeshe's perspective, you can have someone, so let's take something like give someone a glass of water who's thirsty. So you could give someone a glass of water who's thirsty with a mundane concern, because I want them to like me, for example, because if I do, they'll praise me later for it, because if I give this person a glass of water, maybe they're secretly a wealthy venture capitalist who will be so thankful that they'll write me a check for $5 million. But then you can offer that glass with a spiritual concern. So if I give this glass of water to a monk or a nun, then maybe in my future life, then I'll have a pool, I'm being very folksy when I say that, but you can imagine someone thinking that way. And then you can offer the glass of water to someone who's thirsty, and it could be, you know, may I learn, may I accumulate, the merit, may I engage in the positive action, may I accumulate the positive energy to transcend this process. I could offer this water and be like, may by giving this water, may I learn not to be so attached to my body. May I see it as something, my ordinary body, may I see it as something, may I see it for the suffering that it is, and may I develop my meditation practice instead and become liberated through meditation. Or if you're in the great scope, you could offer the water to someone and say, by offering this water, may I solely, I got a good question. The ultimate purpose for the world is solely. And that's the ultimate purpose for the world is to help and not need anything in return. I'll hold on to that, Sergio. And then you could also offer the water to, from a great scope, from the great scope perspective, may I offer this water to practice a bodhisattva's generosity so that I can one day perfect generosity to its greatest extent, and complete the entire Buddhist path, become a fully realized Buddha, and benefit all beings. And so now you have the same action, and what does that? We have all the same action, but we have different motivations. From the Buddhist point of view, because your mind has developed a different kind of motivation, it is changed differently depending on how you approach things. The same thing can be said of actions that are, so giving someone a glass of water is pretty neutral. But what if the action, as a thought experiment, what if the action looks more aggressive, for example, from the outside? So imagine you're pushing someone in the road. So is there a difference between pushing someone in the road because you don't like them and you want to hurt them? Is that different from pushing someone in the road because you're pushing them out of the way of a car? They both land in the road. They might both break their wrists when they hit the pavement, and yet something feels different about them. That's an interesting question. And then Sergio's bringing up a question: is the ultimate purpose to provide the world solely to help and not need anything in return? Maybe, yeah. Is it the ultimate purpose? It depends on your own motivation. If your motivation is to become a Buddha, then yeah, you give. This is interesting. What does it mean to perfect generosity? And a lot of different traditions, not even the Buddhist tradition, talk about generosity with no strings attached is somehow special to generosity with strings attached. And I think we've all felt that experience before when someone's giving a gift, but they want something from you, versus when someone gives a gift and they don't want anything from you. They just genuinely want you to have happiness or to be free from suffering. There's a kind of way in which that generosity is lighter somehow. I think that's an interesting. I think that's an interesting idea. Motivation is embedded really into every aspect of Tibetan Buddhism as I know it. If you look, for example, at the prayers, you get a certain class of prayers where there's sort of the person who's praying is propitiating, or they're asking, or they're requesting inspiration from Buddhas or teachers or three jewels. There's that kind of class of prayer where you're sort of, please bless me, please bless me, please bless me. But there's also those set of prayers where it's checking in with your motivation and refining it. So you find when we're talking about Buddhist tantras, you often find that those ritual texts, they often start with the motivation at the very, very beginning. So if we take, for example, the refuge prayer, which is often said at the beginning of things, it's all about motivation. So the prayer, one translation of the prayer, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Supreme Assembly. By my virtue of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit others. And that's repeated all the time. Motivation, there's a way in which we can set the motivation up front. So motivation before we engage in an action. And then in the Buddhist world, you'll see all those prayers, by this virtue, might become a Buddha to benefit others. In Tantra, you might say, may I instantly, may I more quickly and more quickly generate, may I become a Buddha to quickly and quickly benefit others. But then there's also, the motivation while the action is being engaged in. And at any point, we have the ability to assess where we are or what we're doing and to modify it. We can do it before the action as we get up for the day. We can say, what's my motivation here? Why am I getting up? Why am I brushing my teeth? Why do I keep going? And then as we're doing an action, you can check in and be like, is my motivation still good here? Because sometimes things shift during the middle. There's a whole set of practices where you transform daily activities, and they're all about, in my estimation, they are about your motivation. I can't remember what the Sanskrit term for these practices are, but they're things like when you brush your teeth, you say this prayer and you say this mantra. And when you wash your face, you say this prayer and you say this mantra. Or when you put on your clothes, or sometimes if you're ordained, there might be certain prayers with the different layers of the robes and belts and things like that. It's actually a really beautiful practice and it's very beautiful practice. It's very simple and it's so effective, really. I think it can really change one's life. mm, food prayers in Tibetan Buddhism are about motivation. The reason I'm eating food is to engage in my meditation practice. The reason I'm eating this food is to benefit others. The reason I'm eating this food is to become a Buddha at some point, all depending on your scope. The reason I brushed my hair, the reason, and there are a set of different kind of more formal mantras and prayers, going up the staircase, down the staircase, sitting, lying down, all those kinds of things. Mm. You find this motivation, those kinds of prayers, you find them in sutras as well. I think it's because that's how important it is. So, for example, in versions of the Golden Light Sutra, and there's more than one version of Golden Light Sutra, there's the story of the tigress. I don't know if you've ever heard this story. So in the story of the tigress, the Buddha, as a bodhisattva, so not fully enlightened yet, but on his way, is a prince, part of a kingdom, goes into the forest, comes across a tigress who's starving and can't feed her cubs. And his brothers who are with him, everyone's sort of despairing over the suffering tigress and the cubs. And the two brothers, feel compassion, but don't act on it. And the Buddha, as a bodhisattva, slits his throat and offers his body and blood to the tigress and the cubs and saves them. And before he does that act, he does a prayer where he assesses his motivation. And by this act, may I become fully enlightened. May I serve beings and stuff. I don't know the exact quote off the top of my head, but I could find it. Similarly, this might also come out of Golden Light Sutra too. The story of the Buddha as a bodhisattva, so a different lifetime, comes across a lake or a pond or something of dying fish, like there's drought or something, and moved by compassion, finds a way to channel water or bring water to the pond and fill it, and then recites the name mantra or a mantra of a Buddha in order to teach the fish Dharma. And before he does that, there's also this assessing motivation by rescuing these fish, by giving them water, by teaching them Dharma. May I one day become a Buddha myself. So it's completely embedded in the tradition. From to see it in action is so interesting in one's own personal life. So I'm thinking of different teachers that I've come across and seen. So I had one so I study with Yangtze Rinpoche in Portland, Oregon. And I remember one time there was a student of his, fairly wealthy as far as I know, and she wanted to organize some sort of event. And his advice to her was, what's your motivation? Why do you want to do this? Make sure your motivation's good. And another student, who I personally had problems with, the advice from Yangtze Rinpoche to me was, what's their motivation? What do you think their motivation is? How will you feel about them if you focus on their motivation? And I thought that it was two very interesting real world examples. The first is, just because you can do something doesn't mean it won't harm you. Even if it's elaborate, or even if you're sponsoring Buddhist texts, or building a temple, or doing artwork, even if on the surface you're doing all the spiritual things that look spiritual or look kind, if your motivation is not a spiritual one, from the Buddhist perspective, it's not really that much of a spiritual action. It may have benefit to some degree. Giving a thirsty person water is giving a person water. But for the practitioner, for the giver, what effect will it have on their mind? And then looking at motivation is, the second example. What if you think about their motivation? Does that change anything for you? I thought that was brilliant, because I was having a very difficult time with this person, because I was so focused on the action, and then being encouraged to look at the motivation really softened my own attitude towards them. That kind of lesson, I think, is helpful in the contemporary world, because we don't always agree on the action to do. So, for example, um, obviously during COVID, many things shut down, and when they were opening up a little bit, when it was kind of opening up again, my Tripa wants Rinpoche to teach, because he's very important to the community, and so they put him on a throne, and in front of him they put this plexiglass suspended from fishing line. Now, if you focus on the action, it's not exactly scientific. I mean, it's a respiratory virus. There's a thing, a plexiglass. It doesn't do anything from a scientific point of view. There's no mask. There's no box. He's not surrounded by a box. It's really just a piece of plastic suspended by fishing line. But so then when we assess the action, okay, so from the scientific perspective, we'd say not much use, or a fairly neutral action. It probably won't do anything. But then, when I focus on the action, I'm just like, that doesn't make any sense. Now there's just a piece of plastic in the way. It's causing glare. It's blocking the sound. So I can't hear as well, but that's my own personal difficulties with hearing. I'm not really into this. I don't like this action. I don't like this. I don't like who hung that there. But then if you think about the motivation of the person, we can safely assume that they're trying to protect Rinpoche, they're trying to protect the audience. This is the best they could come up with. It just changes things. From a Buddhist perspective, they got positive merit because of their kind action, and I got negative energy from being so critical and judgmental and difficult. So I just think that's interesting to look at motivation, especially when it's our so-called enemies or people we disagree with. And it can deepen our analysis and hopefully soften us. When there's lots of social debates in the world, different debates depending on history, country, culture, the circumstances. And when we look at the so-called enemy, the so-called opposition, it's really helpful to see what we think about their motivation and whether that makes any impact on us at all. much like that piece of plastic floating in the air, not really doing much for me. I think that's just an interesting question. Hmm. In the Buddhist tradition, we have those kind of exercises. I talked about brushing your teeth with a prayer, and by brushing my teeth, may I become a Buddha for benefit of beings. Or the real training and motivation that's important in Tibetan Buddhist tradition is the trainings on bodhicitta, on developing bodhicitta. For them, developing bodhicitta, part of the great scope view that Lama Yeshe articulates, is the motivation that we should develop. It is the motivation that eventually will develop. And so the exercises on bodhicitta are really important. Yeah, the meditations on bodhicitta can broadly be broken, or the two kind of most famous methods. The first method is the method on 6 causes, 1 effect meditation that traces to Lama Yeshe and earlier, the Lama Yeshe. And the other meditation is equalizing and exchanging self for others, which comes from Shantideva and earlier. In the 6-point and single cause effect meditation, bodhicitta is for the purpose of benefiting others and alleviating their suffering. The desire to become a Buddha, that's what I mean by bodhicitta. The desire to become a Buddha for the benefit of others is generated on the foundation of remembering their kindness and choosing to remember how beings have been kind to you directly and indirectly, and having that pervade your mind so clearly that it's obvious you'd want to repay them, like you'd want to repay any person who did a favor for you. So it's on the basis of their kindness that you generate bodhicitta. In the second bodhicitta set, the meditation technique, one is analyzing the difference between self and other, realizing that the difference between self and other is very subtle and very fragile, and realizing the benefits of emphasizing the other over the self, and by realizing the drawbacks of emphasizing the self over others, seeing that self-preoccupation, self-orientedness, selfishness are destructive to the spiritual project. On that basis, generating bodhi, the desire to become a Buddha for beings. Because in the way that you love yourself, other beings love themselves, and you're just one, and they are infinite. So why wouldn't you choose them? That's not, there's more to that meditation than just that, but just to kind of articulate that there are two techniques to developing motivation in the great scope. To develop motivation, then you need meditation. And to meditate powerfully, you need focus. And so then we do meditations where we develop focus, and then we do meditations where we develop mind states. Now, I've said a lot, I've jumped in lots of different directions, but what are on your minds currently? What are you interested in talking about, or do you disagree with any points, or did anything arise for you? And we'll just have a little discussion, and then we'll move into meditation before the night is over.
I actually had something come up while you were speaking.
Mm.
And thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. This has been great. Um, when you talked about motivations actually shifting or changing during your actions as you're, it just kind of rung a bell for me. And just the reorientation process or kind of analyzing that motivation and trying to shift it maybe back to that previous motivation. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. It's just all happening at the same time. I've noticed that, I want to do something maybe for my kids, right? I start with a great motivation, and then, maybe it's, now I want them to appreciate this. And then I sense that maybe they're not. So all of a sudden things start changing for me. And many different examples, but that's just one of them. And I'm wondering if there's any, skills or certain feedback you can give on that process.
Do you have a more concrete example that you're willing to share?
Yeah, sure. So I had a motivation to meet with people, discuss artistic, just get creative with people. And during these meetings and these interactions, motivations seem to shift more from creativity to developing friendships and kind of moving things outside of what we had initially intended, what our true motivation was. So all of a sudden the focus seems different and it seems good. So it's a little bit confusing in the motivation area. So that's one particular example that isn't too troubling. That's a light problem, but it's an example where there are competing motivations, and I don't know that either is negative, but I want to stay true to the intent. And so at that point it's like, well, both intentions seem compatible, I guess. So anyway, it's just the analytical process during that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, I'd say clearly the first thing would be aware. The step is awareness. I mean, one has to know the motivation has shifted to know it shifted. That seems sort of but deceptively simple, but it's not always so easy for people. Sometimes people for various reasons are not very self-aware. They're sort of on automatic pilot, or they don't see themselves from the outside. It's hard to analyze themselves from the outside. Not everyone can do that so easily. So there's something about being aware that seems really crucial. The next is then the next is, okay, so you have you kind of have your motivation that sort of initiated the action, and then it sort of shifts over time. But so you're in a way you're talking about the group's motivation, kind of changed, but did your motivation change on your side?
Yes. And so
Oh.
that's where I get, a little perplexed is, am I deviating in a way that is, untrue to my initial endeavors? And
Mm.
I know it seemed to me as I'm talking about it, it just seems just inconsequential. But I still, these you're talking, our how we look at things and what our motivation is of the utmost importance, is what we're talking about tonight. So I guess I want, yeah, my perspective and my motivation
Yeah.
seems to have changed, and so I'm conflicted with that
Right. Yeah.
within the group.
Hmm. I mean, from a Dharma Buddhist perspective, it is um, not such a big deal because whether you want to be creative or bond is fairly flexible. The the kind of spiritual motivation is more important. So if I want to be creative because that will help me become a Buddha or attain nirvana or have a better future life, any of those three, then if it shifts to social hour, but your motivation is still one of those three,
So
then it's still a spiritual activity.
So yeah, you kind of you're starting to get to, I think you're helping me get there.
Okay.
And while it may not have been specifically one of those three examples that you gave, there is an intention to
Mhm.
create a space and where awareness and some spirituality can inhabit and be.
Uh,
Um, so
yeah.
so there's that I think you're kind of
Hmm.
getting to what I'm conflicted about is,
Yeah.
I want to maintain that in the way that we all intended. And it seems to be distracting from that, which
Uh,
taking away from that collective, uh,
yeah.
just space for that spirituality to
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah. I can understand.
So
Yeah.
anyways.
No, 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 no. I think it's a really interesting question. I think when it comes to practicing kind of dharma or spirituality in daily life, there's a huge amount of flexibility required. But that is sometimes related to people's personality and dispositions. So there's some people that they'll have something we might call a spiritual motivation, and they're also incredibly disciplined and also very powerful speakers, blunt, disciplined people that persevere. And they're the kind of people where you go to group meditation at someone's house and then people get chatty, and they're the kind of person with their spiritual motivation are like, y'all get it together, like we're here for this, get it together. And some people have the disposition where they're so flexible, maybe less disciplined, adaptable, and they're like, this is what we're doing now. My motivation is the same, to create some spiritual environment. And if this is the energy of the group, who am I to resist it? And so that I think is that personally I think is personality, disposition, how we approach people. Because you can imagine both happening with the same motivation. You know, I want to, maybe there's something about motivation and goal that could be different. My goal is to brush my teeth, but my motivation is, to make sure that I stay healthy enough to become a Buddha. You know,
That's a great
I'm just
distinction.
thinking it. I'm thinking on the fly, which is why I
Yeah,
sound so uncertain.
thank you.
But
This that distinction, I can chew on that.
mm,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah. What group is this? Tani, what do you mean? Hi.
I don't recognize it. I thought it was spiritual toolkit.
You thought it was spiritual, pardon me?
Spiritual toolkit.
No, no.
What class is
Venerable, Venerable Dendrip will answer you.
Okay, thanks.
This is the Friday night public talk. It's the last Friday of every month. Otherwise, it's Dharma Toolkit, but the last Friday of every month is public talk.
Okay, I'll put that on my calendar. Thanks, Interval.
Tutor Nobeling has a very robust calendar. I'm very impressed with how much Venerable Dendrip has to negotiate. Did anyone have other questions? Sergio, what did you think about your question to me through chat?
I guess I was looking more for some insight into whether like a motivation or intent essentially drives the outcome of whether something is, I guess, helps to become a bodhisattva or helps to create negative karma. And I think you explained it. It's just that, I mean, yeah, your examples of, the toothbrushing is what made me think, it could go so many different ways.
Did any examples come to your own mind?
Of my own examples, yeah, I mean, it's everyday stuff. It's, the way you dress someone, and the way you think, as you were saying, whether you're thinking negatively or criticizing or you're being non-judgmental, it's all part of the daily routine, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting because in contemporary, well, at least in the United States, because I don't know where everyone is, but in contemporary world, you can see a slight shift towards talking about impact versus intention. I don't know if you've heard that before. It usually is talked about in like social justice circles. I only know it from a US perspective of social justice. And it's an interesting contrasting idea because in a way, when you're talking about intent versus impact, they're trying to say, you may have good intentions, but what you did hurts or hurt me. And I think there is an interesting balance, but so the reason I'm thinking of this, Sergio, is because when it's a neutral object, it's much easier to analyze when it's offering someone a glass of water or brushing your teeth. But when the object becomes more complex, then I think it's so interesting to what's the balance between these two ideas? Because there are times where our intentions might be good. They might even be, from a Buddhist perspective, might even be spiritual intentions. And yet, they may also have an impact on someone. And that impact may not land. It may not land very well. It may harm the person in some sort of way. And from the Buddhist perspective, there is, in so in Buddhism, there's different sets of vows, and in the Bodhisattva vows, there is one, kind of vow or suggestion, if you will, a vow, to not avoid creating minor, how to say it, to Bodhisattva should be willing to create to break minor rules if it's for great benefit to others. But that doesn't mean, and when you get teaching stories about that Bodhisattva vow, they do tell stories like, and even though he broke a minor rule, it really paid off for him or her or them or whatever. It really paid off for that person. And yet for the person who's experiencing the result of that action, there still might be a kind of pain. So I should come up with a concrete example to explain what I'm talking about. Okay, let me think of a good example. So imagine there's a houseless person, and they're, asking for money, begging for money, and you give them money. I'm trying to think of a good example. Okay, I've got a good example from Portland. So in Portland, we're having a housing crisis. There's lots of tents and people that are houseless, trying to survive in the road. And there's a certain set of people that stand in the middle of highway kind of overpass intersections kind of things. And they're asking for money. So now there's a kind of interesting moral question, right? Do I give them money to meet their needs? Am I encouraging them to ask for money in a place that's pretty dangerous? How do I decide what to do? And what's my motivation? And can you have two completely different answers that seem acceptable and are spiritual? Does that thought experiment make sense?
To me, there's a practical solution. So I already have one, but in terms of either one working towards a positive outcome for the person has to make the decision about whether they want to, give the person money on the freeway or not. I mean, practically speaking, no, because obviously there's dangerous issues. There's other ways to do it.
Okay, so that's a pragmatic approach.
Right.
So what's interesting is, so someone could not give them the money, someone could give them the money, someone could come up with a third perspective. I'm a little far in the fields. I'm so far I've got lost. Venerable Dundrup, I only have 15 minutes left.
If you wanted to go over a bit, that's fine.
But I'm just making sure.
We normally end at 8:30. Yeah.
Okay. So I've definitely lost track of myself. Okay. Let's do a little meditation to wind down in the 15 minutes we have. Focused on bodhicitta motivation. Mhm. And this will be pretty rapid, but hopefully still a little bit useful. So in about 30 seconds, attempt to generate some sort of calm and peace in the mind to the best of one's ability. There are some people for where focus, calming the mind is not particularly easy. And if that requires some movement in some way, moving your hands, bouncing your feet, then no problem. Whatever just causes the mind to relax or to the best focus one can develop. And imagine you're surrounded by all universal beings, and they're all in the form of humans seated on meditation cushions. This is just for auspiciousness because in the Buddhist tradition, being human is considered very, very good. So imagine all beings, universal beings, are humans that are around you. And try and recall all those beings have been kind to you directly or indirectly at some point in the long past or in the present. You know, your food requires living beings. Your clothing often requires living beings. The house you're in, all the technology that allows us to communicate over time and space. All the healthcare workers and nurses, doctors, and other staff, other types of workers. If we were capable of understanding all the connections, the interrelatedness of beings, there wouldn't be one being in the universe who didn't support your well-being directly or very distantly indirectly. And try and remember that kindness and see it as kindness. Even if they got compensated, even if they got paid, even if they did it for worldly motivation, try and see it as a kindness. You know, thank you for building my house. Thank you for inventing the machine that makes my clothes. Thank you for giving me your body, feeding me. Thank you for developing the medicines and technologies that make life easy. And then allow the wish to repay that kindness to arise. Oh, they're so kind to me. If I don't repay them, I'll have wasted some sort of opportunity. I'll have not met my own obligations to beings. I'll have wasted their pain and suffering. And then think, like me, all those beings wish to have every kind of happiness known in the universe. And if I can wish myself to have happiness, I can wish for them to have happiness, to develop that wish. May all these beings who have been kind to me have every kind of happiness that they wish for. And we'll call that the mind of love. Let's develop the mind of love. And all these beings wish to be free from every kind of suffering there is, just like you wish to be free from every kind of suffering. So you can wish that for yourself, so you can wish it for others. And we'll call that the mind of compassion. Wish, develop the wish that all beings be free from every kind of suffering. And then take responsibility for all these beings. All these beings have been kind to me, directly and indirectly. They want happiness, they want to be free from suffering just like I do. But I'm only control of myself, right? So I'm going to take responsibility to help alleviate their suffering, to help bring them happiness. I can't wait for others to do that for them, for those people, beings. I need to do that. So I'm going to take responsibility for them. But at the same time, I know that I have limitations of body, speech, and mind. I don't always do the right things. I don't always say the right things. I don't even think the right things. By right, I mean helpful things. I'm limited. I don't know what people need. I don't have all the skills I need to help them. And so then with that healthy kind of understanding, then we can think, may I develop all the natural qualities I already have within me, all my natural human qualities, may I develop them perfectly. May I develop my generosity perfectly. May I develop my ethics perfectly. My patience, my perseverance, my focus, my wisdom. May I become a Buddha because all those beings have been kind to me and have helped me directly and indirectly, want happiness, want to be free from suffering, and I want to help them accomplish those things. So develop the wish. May I become a Buddha. To benefit all living beings without exception. And if that feeling doesn't arise very easily, or it's, weak, or you lose it, then start at the beginning. Remember the kindness of beings, and then work your way up. And then, as is traditional, we'll do a kind of a dedication. It's sort of like a wish. It's also a way of checking our motivation at the end of the activity. So in the Buddhist tradition, all the energy that we've spent being here, being patient with a new speaker, getting the technology right, advertising the event, changing our lives to accommodate, all that activity, all that is wasted if it's not given a direction or a spin. So we make some wishes, some prayers, some hopes in order to protect it from future moments of anger or clinging attachment or destructive ignorance. And so we make a wish, or we hope we dedicate to long lives of all spiritual teachers. May we always see them as perfect from our side, and may we always work to serve them to the best of our ability, and may we always never be separated from them and learn from them. And then if we have a connection with Buddhism, may we never be separated from the path of renunciation, bodhicitta, the pure view and emptiness in 2 stages of tantric practice. And then if we have a connection to the Gaelic school, Lama Tsongkhapa, may we never be separated from Lama Tsongkhapa and the teachings of the Gaelic school. But then there's other schools of Tibetan Buddhism, Kagyu, Sakya, Nyingma. May we not be separated from those, if we have a connection with teachers from those teachings from those schools. May all those that think about us, remember us, dream of us, speak to us, hear our voices, see our bodies, speak our names, touch our bodies, like us, love us, hate us, hurt us, even if they kill us, may they have every kind of happiness and be free from every kind of suffering. May I become like an inspirational object, or in our tradition, I might say holy object. May I become a holy object for living beings, which is to say, in any way that they interact with me, whether with neutrality, kindness, or aggression, may it, by virtue of my hope, or my prayer, my hope, my wish, by virtue of my wish and the accumulated energy, may it cause them to have every kind of happiness, to be free from every kind of suffering. And then pray that all wars, fighting, famine, all the things around this earth that are happening, may they instantly cease by virtue of our merits or positive act, or the energy of our positive actions. And may all non-human beings be free from every kind of suffering. May this earth be saved and healed and so forth. And as we've been doing this practice, many beings have died or found out they're dying, or they're in the process of dying. If they're able to become well, may they become instantly well. And if they're unable to do so, may they transition peacefully. And may they find, have every kind of happiness, be free from every kind of suffering in whatever experience occurs after death. May all beings have all their ordinary needs met: food, medicine, companionship, so forth, careers, so forth. May everyone have what they need. And may all the spiritual activities of beings, so the activities with a spiritual motivation attached to them, may they have everything occur without obstacle. And with a study, memorize, read things, meditate, may they be able to do that. And if we're able to support beings with their mundane or spiritual needs, then may we not hesitate to help them accomplish those things. The male institutions that support human development, may they have every resource they need. Most importantly, they need people to attend. So may they have people want to engage with them, and then money and volunteers and all that stuff that supports them. So may spiritual institutions like Tusa and other institutions, may they have everything they need. And then at the very least, no matter what happens in our lives, whether we're Buddhist or not, whether we become Buddhist or stop being Buddhist or whatever, at the very least, may we be kind, warm-hearted, brave, may we always be aware of our motivation and try and make the motivation as expansive as possible to move from ordinary pleasure, the pursuit of ordinary pleasure, the desire to be free from ordinary pain, and to expand the scope of our concern as much as possible. Okay. So thank you so much for your patience with me. Janet, if you wanted to stay to talk about your question privately, we can, up to you. Otherwise, so she's going to stay, Venerable Dendrup. So otherwise, thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm going to be doing, I think it's called Be Your Own Therapist. Is that what I'm doing, Venerable Dendrup? I'm going to do that in the afternoons on in the mornings on Tuesday. And that seems like that's a pretty free form program. So whoever comes, we'll be able to decide what we want to do. We can do discussion, we can do more different guided meditations. So it's up to whoever shows up, but I'll be there. Okay. So good night. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, nice to see you and meet you for the first time. I hope to see you again. Thank you for your patience with me. I'm always a little scattered sometimes, but I accept that about myself.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Mike.